Hello, and welcome to a presentation on how to create an MPP research capstone proposal. A good research proposal explains the what, how, when, who, where, and why of your project. What are you studying? How are you going to study it? When does the study take place? Who or what population are you focusing on? Where is the study focused on? And why is this research important? Research proposals are used in various settings, including academic and non-academic settings. In these slides, we're going to discuss your capstone research project, the importance of a good title, the problem, issue, or statement, the importance of your research, the research design, and other important aspects. As I said, research proposals are used in many settings. They're used in academia, government, nonprofit, and the private sector. And we're going to show you a few examples. In academia, research proposals are used to apply for research grants, advancing in different roles, including junior researcher roles, which is my current position, PhD studentship, and also postdocs after you've got your PhD. They also form the basis of a dissertation, thesis, or in your case, a capstone research project. In government, research proposals are often part of an exploratory preparation for consultations, say with Indigenous Canadians or the general public on around an infrastructure project. They are used in budget and off-cycle planning proposals. They're also used in, quote, corporate research, unquote, for individual departments. Most individual ministries will have a corporate research page where they publish internal work and research on their own ministry's mandate. In the nonprofit setting, a grant funding proposal for individual programs is actually very similar to research proposals in academia. And many times, some of these grant projects will actually require a lit review. Many nonprofits are also undertaking internal research projects, and university nonprofit and government nonprofit research projects are becoming increasingly common as they share data with each other for analysis. In the private sector, research proposals often form major parts of market research plans. They aid in future investments and internal research and development, and big data research is currently forming a major part of corporate activity. Guiding all of this work is the proposal, which again outlines the how, what, who, when, why of your research. We'll provide examples of all of these across different sectors in the notes for this presentation. But I hope what you can take from this is that your research proposal is larger than just your capstone research project, but might form the basis of many policy analysis activities, projects, and other research going forward in your career, whatever path you end up taking. These are your proposal requirements. We're not going to focus on all of these except for the ones in the red square, which form the core of your research proposal. First, a tentative title for the project. A good title for a project focuses on content, results, and method. These are 3 titles from papers I've previously written, and as we're going to see, some of them are better than others. So why does a good title matter? It can be summed up with the first bullet point, searchability. You want other researchers, policymakers, elected officials, and media to easily find your research when it goes online. They might be interested in your subject, but if your title is too obscure, it might not show up near the top of internet searches. Likewise, certain researchers are just as interested in the methods you use as they are in the subject content. So simply stating your approach in the title is a way of attracting attention from researchers in specific fields, where some methods are used more than others. Finally, a good title is an interesting title. Some people might find your work, but will they read it? That's why focusing on these 3 aspects, with some attention to creativity, can go a long ways. Title content. Here's what we mean by this. The title content should include something on the topic of study, the subject population, key variables, or relationship between variables. We provide some examples here in the brackets. Include the results of your project in your title, or in this case, your research question. You don't have results yet, so this is what we call a working title. In this case, include your primary research question, your hypothesis, or your outcome measures. Let's say you're studying the impact of childcare on women's wages here in Alberta. In this case, the outcome measure would be income and whether or not it increases. I'll provide an example of a working title in a few slides. Include your research method in your title. Be more specific than qualitative or quantitative. Describe the analytical method, whether it's a case study, a literature review, a time series analysis, or some other research method. Or you can describe the data gathering process through surveys, interviews, web scraping, or other data collection methods. More on methods a bit later. Let's go back to those original 3 titles and look at them for content, results, and method. Grown locally, harvested globally. The role of temporary foreign workers in Canadian agriculture. It's an interesting title and outlines the content, but nothing about the results or the method of the paper. You don't really know what kind of study it is. Slow, subjective, stressful. A guide to Canada's asylum system. Again, you know the content of the paper, and in some ways a guide might give you an idea of what the paper is going to talk about or how it approaches the topic of asylum in Canada. But again, it doesn't really go into results or method. This last title I think is the best of the 3. While perhaps not as witty as Grown Locally, Harvested Globally, it outlines the content, the results, and the method of the paper. The Trump travel ban and increased migration to Canada, evidence from an interrupted time series. Right there, you have the content of the paper, the results, and the method. Here's an example of a working title, taken from the final title of the paper I just mentioned. We go from the Trump travel ban and increased migration to Canada, evidence from an interrupted time series, to did the Trump travel ban increase immigration to Canada? An interrupted time series of visa application. Your supervisor would have a pretty good idea of what you're going to study, what you hope to find. Again, this is the outcome measure, increased immigration, and what approach you're going to take to the data. Other rules with titles. They should be about 10 to 15 words, not much more than that. No exclamation marks, but question marks are appropriate. Don't use phrases like a study of or analysis of. If you're going to say that they're a study or analysis, you should state what type of study or what type of analysis. Otherwise, those words are just taking up extra space in your title. Subtitles can include geographic or temporal scopes. A case study in urban design in Calgary, 1995 to 2005 is one example here. A reference to theory, how does John Doe buck median voter theorem, and additional context for your paper. Inventive titles are interesting and fun, and they can actually increase readership, but don't let flashiness distract you from explaining content, method, and results. Those should take priority, and if in the process you think of a really inventive title, certainly go with it. The problem, issue, or statement. Your problem, issue, or statement should be in the first sentence, ideally, or the first paragraph of your research proposal. It could be a real-life issue or problem. For example, refugee claims have been spiking over the past few years at Roxham Road, Quebec, and your paper is going to resolve how to answer that. It could also be an issue in theory or an approach to public policy analysis. For example, you could offer advice on the advancement of gender-based analysis in Canada and the federal government. You can also consider stating the primary variables. Again, these are the subject population or the outcome measures or the measures of study, the methods or sub-questions used to address this issue or statement. We'll go into that in more detail later. A major part of any research proposal is the lit review. A literature review is more than just a summary. It should cover substantive findings, theoretical concepts, or methodological contributions. As I said in the previous slide, don't just summarize what others have said in the subject. String together a common narrative of themes, points of agreement and disagreement, and theories used on a topic. What are the unfilled gaps? Gaps are opportunities for young, aspiring researchers to add something to the conversation, or the research of a particular subject, or the methods. But don't force a literature review. Sometimes a topic simply hasn't been studied in depth. Trying to find a topic-adjacent issue and note how it's studied. For example, the issue of housing affordability is adjacent to the issue of homelessness. And reading up on papers on housing affordability can give you insights about how to approach your topic on homelessness. If there's a gap, note the gap in your proposal and paper, and then state how you're going to try to fill it. The next 3 slides detail what I mean by substantive findings, theoretical concepts, and methodological contributions. These are just made-up quotes, not pulled from any paper. Beginning with Card and Kruger, empirical literature on minimum wage laws and their impact on employment have generally shown little to no effect. The research by Dubé has attributed this to monopoly power by larger firms. Theoretical concepts. An ongoing debate in migration literature is the push-pull factor of country-level wealth. The push theory proposes migration climbs with higher levels of wealth until it begins to taper, usually around the 11,000 per capita GDP level. By contrast, the pull theory argues that per capita GDP levels in receiving countries swamp out the effects of per capita GDP in home countries. You'll note here in the last sentence that I actually take an approach. This paper takes the latter approach. This is something you might want to consider in your own paper of taking an approach if there's an ongoing debate among scholars. The introduction of RCTs and development research has provided greater insight into the role microfinance plays when compared to previous observational studies. Note here that you're not just summarizing RCTs, you're also talking about their history in comparison to other methodological approaches. Now we're going to move on to stating the importance of the project. State the importance of your research project. You could say that you are solving a public policy issue that will improve the welfare of a large population or subpopulation. Does your project increase the availability of potable water and reserves? Then state that, and how that will benefit the lives of indigenous. You could say that you're filling a gap in public policy research. Is there not a law on zoning jurisdiction in Canada? State that. And you could even link into the previous point about how zoning is a very understudied topic that could improve the lives of affordability for Canadians. You could refine an approach to public policy analysis. Do you have a better way or a new take on gender-based analysis? State that and how this methodological approach can potentially apply to the various fields and areas of study in Canada at the federal government and in academia. You could also state that you're confirming or refuting other research, government analysis, or popular opinion. Again, if you state that, you should probably talk about what the popular opinion, government analysis, or research is saying, and how this will clear up those misconceptions, confirm them, or refute them. On to research design. A research design is your strategy for carrying out a particular study. It is a succinct, logical plan for collection, interpretation, analysis, and discussion of data. In your proposal, you need to describe the data, whether qualitative or quantitative. You need to describe your approach or method for analyzing it, and what resources you'll use in that analysis. Where does the data come from? Is it from Statistics Canada? Did you conduct surveys, interviews? Did you get it from a local nonprofit? Describe its source. What is the geographic and temporal scope of the data? What area do you look at? Is it here in Alberta? Is it focused just on the city of Calgary? During what years or what periods? Is it monthly data, daily, weekly? What variables does the data describe? This could include everything from gender to the price of housing, ethnicity in Canada, or wage levels. Are there ethical concerns with the data? Do you need to go through ethics to get it? If so, say so. If not, say so. One way you could phrase it is, we do not anticipate a need for ethics review for this research project, as the data that we are using is anonymized. Side note, as I say here at the bottom, here's where you take some credit if you find a new and exciting source of data. You can also take credit for establishing new ways to measure existing data. Make sure you state your credentials and how you're adding to the conversation. New data is one way you can add to the conversation around a particular topic. After describing the data, use the method you're going to use to analyze it. Here are some overarching design types: descriptive, correlational, causal, review, and meta-analytic. We're going to describe some of these in the next few slides. Descriptive research designs answer the who, what, when, where, and how of research. They cannot state why, meaning they can't establish causal relationships, but they can make important suggestions, and sometimes a causal relationship isn't even a major part of the research question. Descriptive designs can be quantitative or qualitative. They're often exploratory, meaning that they're used before deeper dives into research, but that isn't to slam them. Oftentimes they're just sufficient on their own, and they can be used to make very important policy decisions. They often use surveys, whether surveys of persons, geographical surveys, or other types of surveys, interviews, or databases for sources. Descriptive research designs that focus on quantitative data often use descriptive stats, such as frequencies, averages, and percentage changes. Figures often include bar charts, line graphs, maps, and pie chart. My own capstone research project might be described as a descriptive research design. It summarized the income refugees received from the Canadian government during their first year in Canada, showed the affordability of rental housing throughout Calgary by neighborhood, and I calculated a very simple rent-to-income ratio for each neighborhood. Again, the issue of cause and effect didn't really come up in my research project. That wasn't really important. I focused on what is, which is what is the housing affordability for refugees in Calgary? And I could provide some suggestions or recommendations off that. A descriptive research project in this form is a very useful and very handy type of research project that can add to the conversation around various topics in Calgary, Alberta, and the rest of Canada or the world. Descriptive research designs that focus on qualitative data often use interviews, narrative approaches, and archival material. They synthesize the data they find into a narrative approach, note common themes, resolve conflicts, and may include photographs, audio material, and tables describing synthesized research. And they may propose ways in which this all ties together and make policy recommendations off of that. You do not have to include any figures or tables in your research proposal. I only include a few examples here in order to help you better understand what a research design actually means, what it could end up looking like long term, to hopefully help give you a better idea of what to put in as your research design in your research proposal. This is a figure from a recent publication of mine. All it shows is the arrival of international students over various months across various years in Canada. You can pull out some interesting things from this project, but the big thing that I was trying to convey with this paper was how student arrivals dropped during 2020 due to COVID-19 and how the pandemic shifted the arrival of students later into the year. Again, simple description of the stats. There was no necessarily quantitative analysis here necessary other than just summarizing it for the graph. But again, you learn very important things from this figure, and there are certainly public policy implications and larger research questions that could be asked. This here is from a capstone research project by Mackenzie Walton, who did a spatial analysis of the availability of women's shelters throughout Alberta. It might be described as a descriptive research design. These maps describe the location and availability of different women's shelters for women in need throughout the province, and draw a 50 and then 100-kilometer buffer around them. Side note, the title of Mackenzie's research project is a very good example of the whole content, methods, and results format we were talking about earlier. Mackenzie described what he called service deserts, areas of the province without available women's shelters. 43% of the province exists in a service desert. And inside those deserts live 14% of all Albertans. The public policy implications for this are huge. I hope you can see here the power of descriptive research analytics, which is a form that many of our capstone research projects take. There is no real cause and effect to establish here. Mackenzie just simply described what is, and from there we can make some assumptions about what should be. And it's okay to take a moral approach or a public policy welfare approach and say that we will increase the welfare of Albertans if we place women's shelters in these service desert areas. Now we'll move on to correlational research designs. This just simply measures two variables and assesses the relationships between them. They describe the relationship. You can even make predictions from these. You can say if one variable goes up, the other variable goes down. Or if one goes down, the other goes up. Or they might both go up or both go down at the same time. The only thing here is that you cannot establish causation. X may indeed cause Y may cause X, or a third variable you're not even analyzing might cause both. You cannot establish for sure, but there is useful understandings and public policy implications that you can draw from correlational research designs. These are often used in epidemiological or public health research. See case control studies for an example. Correlational research designs often make use of scatter plots to draw relationships between two different variables, and draw trend lines between them to show how they move between one another. For example, in this scatter plot, you can see that as the number of farms decreases, or as we move left along the line, the average farm size jumps up. This points to one possibility, farm consolidation. But it isn't the only explanation, and we can't establish cause and effect for sure. In fact, in some provinces, farms are simply going out of business, subdividing and growing into suburbs. In other parts of the country, like British Columbia, the number of farms is actually static, but they are buying up more undeveloped land and growing into larger farms. But again, this does point to important possibilities of farm consolidation, which is true in many parts of the country. A correlational research design can certainly establish these types of relationships without establishing cause and effect, and can be a self-contained paper, especially if they make note of future opportunities to establish cause and effect. One of the last research designs we're going to talk about in detail is the causal research design. This research design does help establish cause and effect. It usually involves a control group or a counterfactual. Think of pharmaceutical research trials for the COVID-19 vaccines. If there is a control group that receives a placebo, and an experimental group that receives the vaccine, we call this an experimental research design. The important aspect here is that there is random assignment of potential patients. Sometimes, though, there is a natural disaster, a government policy change, or another outside event that affects a group, and we call that a quasi-experiment, meaning that some sort of outside group, not scientists, have come and intervened and caused what looks a lot like an experiment, but without random assignment. Again, there's not random assignment to a control group or a placebo group. A natural disaster doesn't randomly strike a random group of people, it strikes a group of people in a certain area. Likewise, using the Trump travel ban, for example, that was targeted against specific countries. There is no random assignment, but it has a lot of other aspects of an experiment, and social scientists often like to study these. So when you identify a causal research design, you actually need to be a bit more specific. You need to identify either as an experimental research design or a quasi-experimental research design. It's very unlikely as an MPP student you'll be doing an experimental research design, but a lot of researchers in policy do quasi-experimental research, where the government is the scientist, and you are studying the outcomes of a policy change or the potential outcomes. Here is a visualization of a quasi-experimental research design that I'm doing on the Trump travel ban. The red line shows the number of applications from Iranian nationals for a Canadian visa after the implementation of the US travel ban, as well as the impact of Trump's campaign rhetoric during the 2016 primaries and general election campaign. This looks like a lot like a scatter plot or a regular time series design, but there's a key difference here. That difference is the presence of a control group, or a counterfactual, where we extend out visa applications as if the ban never happened. We compare the treatment group, the group affected by the ban, to the control group, and we look at the impact of the ban. And we're able to assign causal effect to the policy change. This is what we mean by a quasi-experiment, where again, the Trump administration performed something that looks a lot like an experiment, where they banned a certain group of people, and we want to see the effects of that ban. But there was no random assignment. Again, they targeted specific countries. So that's why we say it doesn't have all the features of an experiment, but it looks a lot like an experiment, and we measure the causal impact here. Here's another very interesting visualization of a quasi-experiment. This is from Uber. So when there's a lot of people in a certain area trying to get a ride from Uber, there is surge pricing. the price of an Uber goes up. And this has a couple of effects. One, it brings more drivers into the area, and it also reduces the demand for an Uber. So as you can see here, when the surge generator kicks in, the purchase rate, the number of people purchasing, drops dramatically. Again, there is no random assignment here. We're not saying picking up people sitting at their homes. We're not just grabbing people off the street and throwing them into Ubers. There is a group of people who, for whatever reason, are out and about and they want to use an Uber. They are the Uber users. But again, we have a lot of features of an experiment here. What happens when we implement surge pricing? And this is, again, another visualization of a quasi-experiment. I'm very briefly going to touch on some other research types. Certainly, you can actually base a whole capstone around a literature review. Again, the big thing here, as we talked about before, a literature review isn't simply a summary of previous research. You have to ask yourself, how are we going to solve a specific policy issue? And then what you want to say is, what are the themes and the debates around this policy issue that can help us find a good answer for how to solve it? As you look through all the research on that particular issue, the specific policy analysis, you need to organize and draw on, again, the major themes. You need to draw on the points of agreement and disagreement, and then you're going to have to craft a narrative whole and give an answer. Say, based on the body of research that I've seen, these are what I think are the best answers. These are the most robust methods. These are the most well-researched answers. And while there is some disagreement here, this is what I think the answer or the solution to this policy question is. So again, a literature review is completely fine. Again, you just have to remember that it's not a summary. Just a summary of other literature is taking other literature and actually analyzing what other authors have said and then making a conclusion based off that. There are also other subtypes of qualitative analysis. There's historical analysis, which again is a lot of archival research, a lot of audio transcripts, a lot of just sort of summarizing historical trends that you've seen. There's phenomenological research. There's grounded theory, which is sort of as you form your hypothesis as you go. I don't know too much about these types. They're not an area I specialize in, but I am going to provide some notes here in the description of the slides and this video that can lead you to sort of more descriptive summaries of these types of research. And then there's meta-analytic. Again, meta-analytic isn't one that I have a lot of familiarity with, but put very, very succinctly, it is taking a whole bunch of, it's similar to a lit review, and you take a body of research on a particular topic, but instead what you do this time is you actually take specifically the data from these different types, these different publications, and you mash them together into one synthetic data set, and then you redo the analysis on that data set. Again, it's not something that I've done personally, but I'm going to link some notes here into the slides, as well as just the video descriptions that will provide you some resources to look these up if a meta-analysis is something that you would be interested in doing. In summary, when defining a research design, ask your research question first. Define a really, really good research question. Then pick the design from there. Don't start with a design and then try to fit a research question to it. Justify the importance of that research question. As you do your lit review, look for gaps, not just in subject topic, but also in approaches to a different research topic. Then pick the design. Choose something that's within your ability. For example, when I first did my capstone, descriptive analysis was definitely within my ability, but as I say here, add some stretch goals. I was a relative newbie when it comes to visualizing descriptive data. So a lot of my capstone, when I look at it now, looks very simple, but for me back then it was quite difficult, and I spent a lot of time looking up on Excel how to create different types of plots, and that's something that might be within your ability as well. So if you have a lot of familiarity, for example, with Excel, you've done a lot of visualizations there, well, maybe you want to try your hand at some correlations and doing some simple regression analysis. If you've done summary data or summary qualitative information data organization as part of like an interview process or surveys, do a more robust literature review. And really, again, don't just summarize what other authors are saying, but really organize a narrative of themes and counterpoints, debates, and really make some recommendations off of that lit review. So as I said, ask your question first, define its importance, look for gaps, and then pick the design. And if you need some help on any of these, go to your supervisor. They should be able to point you to different resources. And of course, you're always welcome to come to me. Last couple things you're going to want to do with your research design is just define and state any specialized software resources you'll be using. Again, if you're using something like Microsoft Word or Excel, you don't need to necessarily state those, but if you're using a specialized piece of research like ArcGIS, Tableau, RStudio, or Google Analytics, you should state that to your supervisor or other potential funders, supervisors, bosses, etc. in the future. Also, state your experience as a resource. You probably have a wealth of knowledge, some experience, some personal experience in this area, which we're going to touch on next. Yourself as a resource. State your personal and professional experience on the topic. And I'm going to distinguish here professional from academic. What I mean professional is, for example, when I did my capstone research project, I had previous experience working in an immigrant serving nonprofit agency in the Calgary area. That's what I mean by professional experience. I was able to draw on sort of my institutional organizational knowledge from working in that nonprofit, and then really apply that to my research capstone project. So if you have personal experience, if let's say you're writing a topic on persons with disability and you have somebody within your family that has a disability, that is certainly something you can draw on. That along with your professional experience, you should state that within your research proposal and how that will inform your approach. Then state your previous history of research. This is where you do bring in sort of the academic and the analysis background. If you have previous experience researching stuff for a professor, for let's say if you worked in an MP's office or in a political sphere or for some other organization, you did research for them on, if you have experience in the subject matter or in certain methods, you should state those and how you're going to use them in your research project. Also state the impact of your previous work. If your work resulted in an appearance before Parliament, if you obtained some funding for your nonprofit, if you were able to increase sort of revenues for a company you worked with based on your research, these are all things you should outline as stating the impact, and they'll hopefully state some positive impact that might come from this current capstone project. Finally, state what you're going to do with your findings. You're all in public policy because you likely want to have an impact on what happens in the public sphere. There are issues that you care about and you want to make changes. This is where you state what you're going to do with your capstone findings. You might submit excerpts of it to an academic journal. You might write as an op-ed or graded literature for the School of Public Policy. You might send it to an official or an elected representative as a policy brief. These are all things you should state in your capstone research proposal, that you hope this is what you hope to do with the findings of your research. What is the hope for impact? Do you want to make a policy change? Do you want to make analysis better for Canadians? State that towards the conclusion of your research capstone research proposal. And that's it. You've made it to the end, or the end of the beginning. Some final notes on your capstone research proposal. It is low stakes, meaning that if you try your best, your professor will provide you some feedback, give you some recommendations, but you're not getting kicked out of the program and you're not losing funding. Now that said, it isn't uncommon for the school to hire students who've completed a really good capstone project and have a specialization in some area. And the ability to show a good research proposal will increase the possibility that happens later on. But like I said, overall it is very low stakes. It is a safe place to try this out, especially when it comes to future proposals, because future proposals are high stakes. Employment, PhD studentships, funding, postdocs, advancement within a government career or corporate setting. Your ability to do a good research proposal will help you out in those settings a lot. So again, how do we do this? Start with the policy issue in mind. Define why it's important. It could be important for real life reasons. It could increase the welfare of a lot of people if you actually make a good policy change here. It can be important for methodological reasons. Maybe you can improve the approaches for our policy analysis here in Canada or in Alberta. Then ask questions and sub-questions about that issue. What happens if we change this thing about this issue? What if this issue never happened? How might people respond if we implement a new policy? How should we announce the policy? These are all really good research questions. Look what others have said about the issue and how they've approached it. Look at the questions they themselves have asked. Don't just summarize what they've said, but really create for yourself and for others a narrative. Look for the points and counterpoints. Then define your own approach. Form a strategy for describing your data, for analyzing it. It should be within your ability, but should also make yourself stretch. and explain the tools that you're going to use to analyze it. And finally, advocate for yourself and your impact. You've all gotten to the School of Public Policy because there's something about your academic and professional history that makes you stand out. Outline your professional research and your own personal lived experience. Outline your previous experience researching similar topics. Tell your supervisor how you're going to tackle the topic and why you are the best person to do this. Do not be modest. Modesty will kill the success of future proposals. You're going to learn new things and you're going to stretch, but you're here again for a reason, and you need to tell us why you're the best person to research this topic. And that's it. I wish you the best success in your research capstone proposal, and look forward to reading them in the future.